This is Honorable Chairman, National Commission for Scheduled Tribes and other members, sir. This is indeed a very distinguished panel that we have here. Dr. Walter Fernandez, I'm just repeating for the sake of everyone's benefit, is a senior fellow in the Northeastern Social Research Center in Assam, Meghalaya and Nagaland, who's a great authority on this subject. Dr. Virginius Khaka has produced the famous Khaka report, which is a great backgrounder of sorts for anything connected with tribal issues. He is today a professor of eminence in the Tejpur University in Assam. Madam Shamona Khanna is advocate in the Supreme Court of India and has formerly consulted for the Ministry of Tribal Affairs. Ravi Reba Pragadaji is Executive Director of Samta. Sir, we are aware of the famous Samta judgment, which brought about the District Mineral Fund and various other provisions. In fact, the Samta judgment is a very seminal judgment of the Supreme Court, which everyone connected with tribal affairs should necessarily read line by line. Amrish Mehta Saab is a trustee and full-time executive of the Action Research in Community Health and Development in a body called Arch Vahini, based out of Gujarat. Friends, when we begin this session, which is entitled Perspectives on Land Rights of Scheduled Tribes and Their Displacement from 5th and 6th Scheduled Areas, I will request each of the panelists here to give their thoughts on this subject. But while giving their thoughts on this subject, it will be useful if they also try and cover the special rights and privileges that are accorded by the 5th and 6th Schedule of the Constitution to the scheduled tribes. In particular, there is need for debate on the distinction between the 5th and 6th Schedule. How really successful is the 6th Schedule of the provisions on the ground? How have they made a difference to the lives of the tribes? Have they prevented them from being displaced? Have they prevented them from being ignored? And have they helped in consultation and in ensuring that tribes are not necessarily displaced or made landless or alienated from their land? Would you recommend a transition? And this is, of course, a constitutional issue, but in an academic forum, perhaps we should discuss a transition from 5th Schedule to the 6th Schedule. What are the problems of the 6th Schedule? And ultimately, what is the way forward for the nation? So, having said that, and broadly defined a template for our discussion, I will now request Mr. Dr. Walter Fernandez, Senior Fellow, to begin on this topic. You can sit here or speak from there, whichever is comfortable for you.
Because I can take you can take it from.
Thank you, Mr. Chandra. I'll be brief on this. While my scope is going to be limited mainly to Assam and Meghalaya, I'll begin with the overall situation. How is it? Yeah, right. Okay. To begin with, AP, that is Arunachal Pradesh, not Andhra Pradesh, and Manipur in the northeast are only two states in India with a big tribal proportion and not coming under either schedule. And Arunachal Pradesh in particular faces this special problem of not being under the schedule because even Manipur has limited laws protecting the hill areas where the 40% of its tribals live. But Arunachal Pradesh has no provision and there is a contradiction between the legal and social reality. The legal reality is that it comes under the formal law. The people run their affairs under the customary law, which is not recognized under the Constitution or under the formal law. And most of their land is community managed, which means that displacement is very easy. And land alienation is high in Arunachal Pradesh without being recognized simply because of this ambiguity of law. Now, then 4 states come under, Nagaland comes under Article 371A, which is customary law, and then I'll come mention it at the end. In Assam, there are 3 scheduled areas under the 6th schedule: Karbi Anglong, Dimasao, and the Bodo areas. But then the Bodo area and the 6th schedule in Tripura are recent. Paragraph 3 on land has been removed from it. So while the schedule should be protecting land, these 2 states do not come, while coming under the 6th schedule, the paragraph 3 on land has been removed from it. So land alienation becomes easy. Now, possibility of land alienation. This is, as I said, this ambiguity in Arunachal Pradesh is one of the reasons for, major reason for land alienation. It makes land alienation somewhat easy because most tribals live in the common land, CPRs. Now, that's the difference on one side between Arunachal Pradesh and Manipur that don't come under either schedule and those that come under schedule. But within that itself, as I said, there's difference. Karbi Anglong, Dimasa, and Meghalaya have all the clauses, while the border area in Assam and Tripura do not have paragraph 3. Because those are the areas where there has been massive land alienation. There is no provision there either for restoring or preventing land alienation. So that is an area of conflict which needs to be looked after. Which means that in principle, even without paragraph 3, the 6th schedule can prevent land alienation because its takeover requires village council, the consent of the village council. And which means that in principle, the 6th schedule can prevent tribal land alienation. The reality is substantially different because of the the customary law and formal law interface which it represents. Now, first of all, the state or the administration often abuses the clause on consent of the village council. And most of the land alienation is caused through that it treats, while under the schedule, the consent of the village council is needed, the administration in practice treats the village chief as the owner of land and deals only with the chief. We have done studies on displacement 1947 to 2010 in 4 states of the Northeast. We have completed. We are doing in the remaining 4, and we realize that the situation is rather common in these. Our estimate for the Northeast is about 40 lakhs displaced, but most of them are from the CPRs. And that this is done by dealing directly only with the village chief as the owner. I'm just giving 2 examples in Tura district of Meghalaya, the Tura airport and the Northeastern Hill University, the Tura campus. In both of them, land was taken over by the state by dealing directly with the chief, and then he was paid compensation. And he shared that compensation with the families that were using that land, and the amount depend on their relationship with him. Those who were close to him got more, and those who were not that close got less. So there is that arbitrary behavior which makes it difficult. Then, but the second part is internal land alienation, which official policy make possible through this formal customary interface. The customary law has some place under the sixth schedule, though it's not the primary law followed, unlike say in Nagaland and Mizoram, which come under Articles 371A and G respectively. They come under the customary law. But in principle, the customary law has some place. In reality, it is turned into an interface between the formal and customary law with much ambiguity, and that makes land alienation easy. Let me give this, such things like the state-sponsored schemes of commercial crops. Once again, from Meghalaya, from the Garo Hills, East Garo Hills. In the 1980s, the Rubber Board introduced rubber plantation in that district. A condition for that was land should be individually owned and in the, for loans and subsidies, and in the name of the owner. It's a matrilineal society, and the man was recognized as the owner by the state, which meant that much community land was transferred to individual men. With that, the woman lost the little power she had, and the community broke up because individual land became the norm. We did the study 20 years later in 2001, and we realized in that district, 30% of the families were landless. That's one example. So men take over. The other is so we have similar situations in the Karbi Anglong district and Dima Hasrao in Assam. Karbi Anglong by introducing coffee plantation, and Dima Hasrao by tea plantation. Similar clauses and massive internal land alienation. The second is the men who are in charge of the village council using their power for transferring land to themselves. Let me take the case of the Khasi Hills in Meghalaya. You have any number of villages where, again, a matrilineal society, community-owned land, transferred to, but men who run the village council use their power to transfer land, community land to their own name, in individual names. So with that, the woman loses the little power she has, plus the community breaks up, and landlessness is caused. So you have the second. The third is, so I've given examples already. Now, the third is the lack of infrastructure. Lack of infrastructure. The inter-village connectivity is extremely weak in the Northeast. And all the medical and educational institutions are concentrated in Guwahati and Shillong. So, first of all, even there are private institutions, civil society groups and church groups running these institutions in the villages, but people don't have access because of poor connectivity, no road connection. For any health emergency or for education, children have to be sent to Guwahati or to Shillong or to cities outside the Northeast. And where do they get that money? Again, they sell the only resource they have, land, internal land alienation again. Rich men from the community buy land from other tribals. And it's much worse when it comes to health emergencies, because it is an emergency. You have to give your best land at throwaway prices. So according to my estimate, something probably around 50% of land alienation today is internal because of these abuses. So there is the sixth schedule, but when it is combined with the customary law, it works well, or even the customary law by itself. We have completed the study on development-induced displacement in Nagaland. We realized that the impoverishment of the tribes is very great in Assam and in the remaining states of peninsular India where we have done. It's great, but the situation is much better in Nagaland because it comes under the customary law and land was taken over through negotiations with the village council. And they put many conditions. So they gave mainly common land and rehabilitation and was fairly good. So the situation is not that bad in Nagaland. Similarly in Meghalaya, Umia Umtrao Dam of the 1950s, when the customary law was working, when the community was strong, though the state did not rehabilitate them, the community rehabilitated all of them, which is not the case with later rehabilitation. So I'm running out of time, so I better stop here. So I think one needs to take a new look at the sixth schedule from the point of view of its implementation. While in principle, on paper it is good, the reality is not good because abuses are easier under it than under the fifth schedule. That's why if you ask me, Mr. Chandra, whether the fifth schedule areas should be brought under the sixth schedule, I would say no. Instead, introduce in the fifth schedule areas, in the fifth schedule, the good clauses of the sixth schedule and strengthen the fifth schedule rather than introduce the sixth schedule which is good on paper, but abuses are much easier. Thank you.
Now I'll request Dr. Virginius Khaka, a professor of eminence in the Tezpur University, Assam, and a great authority again on tribal issues, to address this subject.
Mr. Raghav Chandra, chairperson of this particular session, distinguished guests and the panelists here. Well, I don't think I have anything new to say. In fact, much of what I was planning to say actually was already presented in the last session. I'm not really a specialist again in Jharkhand and Odisha, but since I have general interest and I thought there are some specific issues, therefore let me just talk about it. To begin with, let's look at the states are dispersed over different parts of India. And if you really look at the social development indicators, probably you'll find the Odisha followed by Jharkhand is the worst in the country. If you look at the people living below poverty line, Odisha will be much larger. People with illiteracy is very high. In terms of health indicators, whether you talk of infant mortality, child mortality, under 5 mortality, Odisha is going to rank number 1. And so also it will be followed by Jharkhand. Now this is a paradox, isn't it? In spite of the fact that Odisha and Jharkhand is one of the most, in a way, also may called the integrated, in the sense from the 50s and 60s onwards, you find large number of industrial projects, dams, mineral exploitations really took place. That was the signs of development, that was the signs of integration. And if you find any state which is very tightly integrated, it is Jharkhand and Odisha. And you find that the social development indicators turns out to be the poorest. And therefore, I think it is first thing to reflect, is integration a solution? Or are we really, in the name of integrations, we are talking something else? And I feel, in fact, I was discussing with Walter, integration is not a proper term. I think what actually is happening in this part of the mainland India is assimilating. You are completely assimilating them. And this assimilation, or even if you take integration, adverse. Tribals are not really getting integrated in the way in which they are supposed to integrate. They are integrated as landless, as marginalized peasants, as small peasants, as those losing land, as those losing control, therefore completely become an assetless. Now that's the kind of questions. And therefore, the Odisha and Jharkhand, if you really look at, these are really a sort of bad example of what integrations can be. If you really want to look at integration, probably I find northeastern states is much better, because they are able to keep themselves intact, their culture, their identity, their land and resources. Yes, there are problems, but they are able to keep them intact. They have a space to govern themselves in terms of autonomous resource council, however inadequate it may be. And therefore you find that if you really look at, why is it in northeastern states, the social development indicators is very good. You look at Nagaland, you took Mizoram, you take even Arunachal Pradesh, which may be relatively low, but if you really compare with the peninsular India, Northeast India has done far, far better. Now, what is the reason? I think we have to really look at with larger number of resources that they have done, or you find they have institutions of governance where people, at least tribals, can govern themselves. But look at the peninsular India, where you find they have no institutions of governance. They have to dependent on the state. They have to dependent on the governor in the 5th schedule areas, because the governor is supposed to be the custodian of the tribals. And what have the governors done in the last 7 decades? They were supposed to find out whether any law enacted by the center or the state or the policies, whether it is adversely impacting the tribals or not impacting, and if it is, then they were supposed to adapt, they're supposed to say that this law cannot really be implemented. Have they really done anything? So if at all you talk about the recommendation, the first thing is that maybe we have to say that governors must be mandated, that look into every law that is being passed, every policy that is being passed, and see, exercise their judgment as to whether this is for the good of the tribals of the respective states in which they are governors. I think that's very, very important, because that is where you have left. Tribals don't have self-governance. Yes, we have what is called provisions of panchayat extension scheduled areas, but it is limited to a village. But you have not even allowed to have teeth that. So if you take a provision of Panchayat Extension Act or Forest Rights Act, very clearly said the other acts, other policies must be synchronized with the provisions of the Panchayat Act. Have we ever done that? So if at all we have to look at the policy recommendation, then I think all other things must be synchronized with the provisions of the Panchayat Extension Act. That's very, very important. So I think, so if you really look at this, therefore it basically means that some of the very important things which are there in the tribal areas, the constitutions, the governor power, the scheduled, what we call the provisions of Panchayat Extension scheduled areas, the Scheduled Tribe and Other Forest Dwellers Act, which are very, very important as to how other acts need to be synchronized with this particular act. That is, again, is the most important. So if you really look at all these, it doesn't really happening. If you really look at what is happening in Jharkhand today, that you have an act, scheduled, what is called Chotanagpur Tenancy Act, which came as early as 1908. You have Santhal Pargana Act that in 1949. And that today the government itself is trying to challenge this, what is called trying to bring about an amendment of the Chotanagpur Tenancy Act. act which is trying to protect the land. In fact, government is trying to amend in order to see as to how the land could be made available for the mining and other kinds of what's called projects. So the state itself is in a way doing it. So similarly, you have, for example, I think in Jharkhand there is a what is called the scheduled areas regulations. I think it came in 1969, which is supposed to restore the land. And if you really look at these areas, the land alienations, not only in terms of land moving from tribals, is happening. Is happening. There is no respite of what began in the colonial period. So you find land, and I think the problem is that again the whole idea of alienation, probably we need to scope the idea of alienation. What does alienation really means? Alienation was primarily in terms of the land which actually tribals privately owned, the Hapata, it is alienated from him to someone else. That is what alienation. But today if you find alienation is much larger. What about the state which is acquired? Is it not alienation? If the community land, community common property resources being alienated, a state is making a claim, diverting the land, is it not really alienation? So the other recommendation, if you really want, then I would like to see that the scope of alienation is actually enlarged rather than just talking in terms of when it really moves from tribals to non-tribals. So that's, I think, is important. The other important point, particularly if you see today, is urbanization. Urbanization is just expanding. The number of towns that have really come up. I've traveled in Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand, and you find that the number of towns that are really growing up, the tribal areas are getting urbanized. But if you really look at those urban areas where you don't find tribals, tribals are missing from those urban towns. So how therefore the land actually is passing from tribals to non-tribals. And therefore you find that this urbanization again needs to be addressed. We cannot say that tribals only live in rural areas. Increasing urbanization is happening and we need to address these questions of urbanization in tribal areas. The number of towns that have grown, who are living in this town, how this is really operated, how land transfer is taking place. And therefore that the point that was made in earlier is about that what is called notification of municipal area into scheduled areas, that needs to be addressed. Why is it that you find increasingly this kind of notification? And of course, the act which probably, there was a draft probably which was pending that were provisions of municipal act into the scheduled areas. That still has not been taken forward. I think if you are talking about these provisions of the municipal act into scheduled areas needs to be addressed. So there are very important issues which are really coming up. The other thing you have to see is that, again, I think it was mentioned, there are all kinds of laws. There are laws which are meant to protect tribals. There are laws which actually talks about, let's say, in terms of conservations, in terms of wildlife sanctuaries, in terms of public domain, in terms of public purpose and all that. I think we need to really look at even eminent domain. Probably there's no problem with public domain or eminent domain or public purpose and all that. But I think there's a lot of misuse of this public domain, public purpose, and so on and so forth. What does it? Does it mean that tribals not really part of the public? Invariably, you'll say public. Public as if whole of India is public, but tribals are not really public. And therefore, this whole idea of getting land for public domain, for public purpose, again, needs to be problematized. We need to really think over it. What exactly it really means. Are not tribals a part of the public? And therefore always, so if you really look at the whole of the history of the tribals, particularly in peninsular India, what do you find? They have given much more than what they have achieved. You know, I think I was very interested in terms of the kind of allocation of resources, what from mining, how much royalty is going to the state. I didn't know about it. I've been thinking about it, but I didn't have actual data. Now the data is really coming. So all this you are talking about as to how Indian state is doing a great deal for the tribals. What is it doing for the tribals? It is doing much less than what actually is taking away. So it is through hydraulic projects, dams, etc. It has taken much more from the tribals than it has given to the tribals, particularly in the peninsular India. So that's the kind of problem that we are having. In other words, therefore, we have to think about what is. I personally feel, if you like look at, tribal whole development that is taking place, or national development is taking place, is at the cost of the tribals. They've been paying the price. Paying the price from the 50s onwards. If you, Jharkhand and Odisha, again, a very good example. The kind of industries they came, the mines they came up, and how they have been displaced without even able, they didn't get a job. Even when they got a job in the early phase to plow, to make the level of the land. Once that is there, you throw them out. This is how the India has treated the tribals, although I think one of the best constitutions. One of the best constitutions, and yet the problem of the tribals is the poor, is the most, what's called, what should I say, is most deplorable. I think this whole idea, we have, I'm not going to recommend, but I think we have to really talk about this development. Whose development are we really talking about? There's nothing. So, are the tribals a part of the larger development? नौकरी नहीं मिली है, इतने इंडस्ट्रीज है, इतने माइंस है, इतने जॉब्स हुए, आप झारखंड में जाइए ना, नौकरी कहाँ मिली आदिवासियों को? सब बाहर के आके लोग नौकरी ले लिए, आदिवासी वहीं पड़े रहे हैं, अभी भी वहीं पड़े हुए हैं। तो आप बोल रहे थे सेटलर्स कॉलोनियलिज्म बोल रहे थे ना, कॉलोनाइजेशन, बाहर के लोग जा रहे हैं, अभी भी जा रहे हैं। जमीन थे, ब्रिटिश पीरियड में गए, जमीन छीन लिए, अभी भी जा रहे हैं और अभी भी ले रहे हैं। तो आप ट्राइबल्स जो है वहां से भाग के कहाँ आ रहे हैं? दिल्ली में डोमेस्टिक वर्कर्स के लिए आ रहे हैं, स्लम्स में जाके काम कर रहे हैं, कंस्ट्रक्शन में काम कर रहे हैं। तो एक जो है आप जब वहाँ जा रहे हैं, दूसरे ट्राइबल को भगा रहे हैं। ये भगाने का जो अखड़े था वो ब्रिटिश टाइम में शुरू हुआ था। जब चाय बागान बनी तो आदिवासियों को वहाँ से निकाल के असम में आपने ले लिए, और असम में अब वही स्थिति है। और अब जो है फिर वही चीज़ें अभी कंटिन्यू हो रही है कि यहाँ से फिर कहाँ भेजेंगे? अब जंगल उंगल में तो ज़मीन नहीं है, तो शहर में भेजिए, तो ये स्थिति हो रही है। तो अगर ट्राइबल को पेनिनसुलर इंडिया में अगर आपको करना है, तो आपको आपके एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन, आपका लॉ, आपका गवर्नेंस को ठीक देखना पड़ेगा, और उनको कुछ अधिकार तो देना पड़ेगा। क्या अधिकार दे? अब होल्टर साहब कह रहे थे कि 6 शेड्यूल में प्रॉब्लम है, श्योरली 6 शेड्यूल में प्रॉब्लम है, लेकिन 5th शेड्यूल से तो मेरे ख्याल में अगर देखा जाए तो 6 शेड्यूल के लोग अपने को बचा तो पाए हैं, 5th शेड्यूल वाले तो अपने को बचा भी नहीं पाए। और 5th शेड्यूलों के ये भी नहीं आता है कि गवर्न कैसे करें। आप ऑटोनोमस काउंसिल देते हैं तो आप उनको लॉ बनाने का होता है, एग्जीक्यूटिव करने का होता है, थोड़ा सा आर्बिट्रेशन करने का होता है, कुछ तो अधिकार उनके पास है। वो तो आपने दिया नहीं 5th शेड्यूल में, आपने गवर्नर के ऊपर में छोड़ दिया। माँ बाप हमारे गवर्नर थे, उन्होंने तो हमारे लिए कुछ नहीं किया। तो अगर अभी भी कुछ बचा है, उनको बचाना है, तो मेरी राय में मैं तो चाहता हूं कि 6 शेड्यूल के जो अच्छे प्रोविजंस हैं वो आप 5th शेड्यूल में ले आइए, जिससे कि जो बचा उचा है, जो नहीं भी बचेगा उसको बचा सकते हैं। और हमने तो अपने रिपोर्ट में जो हमने तो जो 14 में पब्लिश किया था, हमने तो कहा था कि देयर हैज टू बी सम वे इन विच वी शुड ट्राई टू एक्सटेंड the provisions of the 6th schedule in the 5th schedule areas. हम नहीं कह रहे कि टोटली एकदम पूरा ब्लाइंडली अडेप्ट कर देने चाहिए। वहाँ जो अच्छी चीज़ें हैं उनको लेके हमें 5th schedule का जो प्रोविजंस है वो हमें 5th schedule में ले आना चाहिए। धन्यवाद।
I request Ravi Reba Pragada ji, the Executive Director of Samta, to give his thoughts on this subject.
Shumana, I'll ask you to speak in the last because you're a lawyer, so you'll be able to sum it up. And you know that will save me because we are running short of time. And give your
10 minutes. Thank you, Raghav Chandra ji, and to all the august audience, including the chairperson of the commission. Well, without much ado, I will get into the points because I think both the earlier speakers have created the space where I can then come in with my little experience. Essentially, I'm talking from the perspective of Andhra Pradesh or North Andhra and parts of Orissa that are part of North Andhra. But yeah, it applies to most tribal areas. You see, I was told that instead of talking of problems, we should look at solutions. So I tried to list out a few things. And like Kaka Sahab has said, in the 5th schedule area, And like Walter has said, in the sixth schedule area, there are different people exploiting the tribal people. In the sixth schedule, it is their own leaders. In the fifth schedule, it is the administration, along with some of our leaders. So the problem everywhere is the same in one sense, but here it is more so because all the entire power is with the administration. Like if you take the Rourkela case, which Raghavji in the keynote spoke about, yeah, the problem is from the government. So it is like the guardian or the person who has to look after us, say it is our parents or my father, and he is exploiting me. That is the situation in the fifth schedule area. And it's not just in Andhra, it's everywhere according to me. Now, saying this, some of the main points in Andhra which have come up in the recent times, which I feel the commission should, you might already be aware, like you rightly said about Polavaram. It's the largest displacement in our area. And it is pushed on by this bifurcation of the state. Land records from Andhra into Telangana, Telangana into Andhra. So there's a lot of confusion in those 175 villages that would come under displacement in Andhra itself. This dam will displace people in Orissa also, and it will displace people in Chhattisgarh too. And we had gone to the court through some of our friends saying that in the public hearing that was held, see, in Andhra what is happening is, I don't know whether in other states, in Andhra the administration is very smart. Say in 2001 we had gone to the court with a particular government order which speaks about not displacing tribal people during a development project. So we won a little judgment and we got land to land, etc. It was a successful case in 2001. In 2010, the same government of Andhra Pradesh issued an environment public hearing for Polavaram Dam, and it announced 5 public hearings on the same day in 5 districts. So, which means, see, in 2001 they were not really aware that they should do all this, but in 2010 they did, and they removed that particular government order which says you should not displace. So like this, the administration is actually getting cleverer and cleverer in Andhra, and even without removing the act or something, see, in alienation, like Kaka Saab said, there are 2 kinds of alienation. One is of the individual, non-tribal, who buys tribal land and then expands his family and then expands his area under control. That's one. 2 is where the government comes in. Like if you take the case of Visakhapatnam district, in the entire tribal area, 76.4% belongs to the forest department itself. And there are 3,600 villages in the tribal area. So technically, that 24% of land which is left then, other than the forest area, actually belongs to the people. Now in that you have some huge high altitude agriculture research station, and we have another problem which I don't know in other states if you people are noticing, the nigams, the corporations, the AP Mineral Development Corporation, the AP Tourism Development Corporation. These corporations are really, really undermining the 5th schedule and its provisions, because they technically are state institutions, state instrumentalities, and as per the Samta judgment, they can hold land, they can do business, etc. Or they can get a lease, mining lease. So what happens here is that everything is in the name of the state, but back to the point, there are no tribal people employed. Like there is a case of Bora Caves, which is a very famous tourist spot. Tribal people were the guides before the tourism department went there in '95. And at that time, a good sub-collector like Chandraji was in Korba. This sub-collector issued an order saying 20% from the ticket will be given to the tribal guides. And over a period of time, they changed them into contract workers. And today, the caves earns about 5 crores a year, just the caves from the ticket. And 5 crores, 25% to the local people is a huge amount. But no, they don't give it. And very sad to say, recently the Ministry of Tribal Tourism Secretary and others were there, and we tried to represent this issue, and they were totally, insensitive totally. It was a very sad thing. So Well, I'm just listing out a few other things. We have this whole thing called this issue of Lambadas, which is a very major issue where they have been included in the tribe list, and the local tribal or people in Andhra are resenting this for a long time, and there are lots of movements going on asking for this ABCD in reservation. Then you come to the whole thing of, Samta judgment itself. It was not against mining. It only said that if you want to mine, then give the mining rights to the local people, the tribal people. More and more land should go to the tribal people. That was the whole idea. So if you study how the Samta judgment is being implemented even in AP, we can very clearly make out a case that the government is actually anti-tribal. It's a straight case where they just don't want to give a lease. We have been asking, where we sent out the Birlas and the others in the Samta judgment in 97, the local people have been asking for a lease. The APMDC does not give them, the mines department does not give them, but it gives leases to some non-tribals or some other, Benami, such kind of people, or even our local tribal MLA. There we are trying to negotiate that, like in the Northeast, like Kaka Saab said and like Walter said, we are trying to negotiate that if the government wants to do any mining, then we, the local people, should get the benefit. The struggle is still on. We are not allowing them to mine. But yeah, it's something that we need to decide. If you go back, in 2010, there was a MMDR draft by the then government, which talked of 26% stake in any mining project to the local affected people. Because ultimately, as you see, 90% royalty from mining is coming from these areas. तो ये तो यही हो गया पुराना समय का राजा और प्रजा, माने राजा लोगों से सब लेता है और कुछ नहीं देता है. तो माइनिंग के लिहाज से तो आप देखेंगे तो आदिवासी जमीन से ही पूरा 90% रॉयल्टी आता है, और वो जो भी DMF भी आता है आजकल, वो भी तो वहीं से आता है. तो हम लोग ये देखना चाहिए कि if we want to really help, then there are some very serious changes you need to do. I don't know why none of you thought of something called a Scheduled Area Conservation Act. Forest Department has thought of a Forest Conservation Act in 1980 to maintain that 33% of area under forest. Okay, now if scheduled area from 1950 onwards, if you see, first was the public sector, the dams, the steel plants and whatever. Then after that, after 91, it is a free for all because everybody is going everywhere. And tribal people, ultimately, if you see, we can't stop the migration according to me, because in Visakhapatnam itself, I'm seeing thousands of people coming in from Orissa and Andhra and working in the city in construction. Thousands of them, not like just 2 or 3 camps. They're all over the place. So you see, there are trends that we still should look at and see how we can stop all this. So there is one chance for all of us, and that is through mining. If you can really give local people their due, and see, there was an argument once when we won the Samta judgment, Secretary Industry, Secretary Social Welfare, Andhra Pradesh, erstwhile 97 में, तो उनसे जब बात हो रही थी तो बता रहे थे कि आदिवासी लोगों को हम देंगे, देने से उनके पास पैसा नहीं है. ठीक है सर, आप अगर 10 एकड़ का भी लीज हमें दिलवाएंगे तो पैसा खुद निकलेगा सर, क्योंकि बाहर वालों को माल चाहिए, माल हमारे पास है और लीज हमारे पास है, तो पैसा वो लगाएगा. तो लोगों तो समझिए, क्योंकि हम वो देख रहे हैं 30 साल से 20 साल से. तो दिस इज वन चांस वेयर this historical justice, injustice, whatever we are talking of, in one shot, if you can really handle that mining thing and give the local people, I mean, I'm not talking of major minerals, talking of minor minerals. Minor minerals, cooperatives, हाँ, पर्यावरण वगैरह वो तो अलग बात है. वो तो अभी तक 60 साल तो सब लोग तो खराबी किए हैं, तो हमारा आदिवासी अगर खराब करने से क्या गलती है, ये हमारा आर्ग्यूमेंट है. तो with this, I guess, the last point, Governor and TAC, sir, we don't have a TAC in Andhra from 2001. So, how can, I mean, where do we go? Governors, sorry to say, with due respect to the individuals, but they are useless. It's absolutely, so, I really don't know. Actually, it is a very sad situation for me in 30 years. 30 years back, there were officers, there were leaders, the center, everything was, maybe it was pre-91. Now, after 91 and 20 years down the line, when I'm meeting the local bureaucrats and others, it's actually a very bleak situation, and we don't know how to move. जो भी किएंगे, जैसा आप पत्तलगढ़ी का देखिए, बेचारा आदिवासी लोग, गांव के लोग कुछ लिख रहे हैं पत्थर पे, और उसके ऊपर उनके ऊपर नक्सलाइट का केस हो रहा है. तो ये तो माने हद हो गई सर. सरकार का तो ऐसा हो रहा है कि आदिवासी अब अगर कुछ करना है तो ये गवर्नर का व्यवस्था निकाल दीजिए और कुछ लगाइए ताकि आदिवासी कुछ आगे बढ़े. तो लास्ट पॉइंट सर, मैं पहले सोचता था कि ये जो कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन है, अब ये सब दिया है मगर कुछ होता नहीं है, तो इसको कुछ किया जाए. तो हम पहले मैंने गांव में चर्चा हो रही थी, तो एक लड़का बोला इसको जलाएंगे, तो और एक बुजुर्ग आदमी बोला नहीं नहीं जलाने का नहीं, इसको गांव का बीच में लगा के सब लोग रोएंगे कि तेरा क्या हो गया है कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन का. तो इस तरह मैंने गांव में जब चर्चा होती है तो उनका ये पॉइंट है कि अगर इतना सब कुछ है तो क्यों होता नहीं है. तो ये बड़ा संकट है उनके सामने, और आप सब लोग कुछ सोचेंगे और कुछ आगे बढ़ाएंगे तो अच्छा होगा. थैंक यू. हाँ, यहाँ पर जलाए थे सर, वो गलत था, वो गलत था, उनके ऊपर केस लगाना है.
और अभी कह रहे हैं कि जो कानून बना दिया है ये बहुत गलत हुआ है, इसको हटाओ.
I'll request Amrish Mehta Saab now to give his thoughts on this very, very important subject. Mehta Saab, we have about 10 minutes. 10 minutes? उससे भी कम है, preferably.
I also didn't take much.
No, you were very snappy. Good.
जनरल पॉइंट्स काफ़ी आ गए हैं, इसलिए उसमें नहीं जाएंगे. गुजरात में ट्राइबल एरिया आप सब जानते हैं कि वो पूर्व पट्टी बोलते हैं गुजरात में, क्योंकि पूर्व पट्टी में ही सब ट्राइबल एरियाज जो है लोकेटेड है. उसके जो मेन प्रॉब्लम्स जो रहे हैं वो एक तो डैम में काफ़ी ज़मीनें जो गई है कि गुजरात में जो डैम्स वगैरह में जो एलिनेशन जो हुआ है लैंड का, वो सबसे ज़्यादा जो है ट्राइबल एरिया में हुआ है और ज़्यादातर नहीं हुआ है. ट्राइबल एरिया वो रीसेटलमेंट के सवाल पे हम लोगों ने काम किया है, लेकिन उसमें मैं अभी नहीं जाऊंगा क्योंकि एक हिस्टोरिकल है. सरदार सरोवर में मेरे हिसाब से देश में अच्छी पॉलिसी पहली बार बनी और उसका अमल भी ठीक ठाक काफ़ी हद तक हुआ. उसके काम में हम लोग काफ़ी समय तक लगे थे, लेकिन अभी वो एक हिस्ट्री हो गया है, उसमें अभी नहीं जाएंगे. पिछले 10 साल से हम FRA फॉरेस्ट राइट्स एक्ट का गुजरात में सही अमल हो उसके लिए काम कर रहे हैं, और उसके जो अनुभव आए हैं उसको थोड़ा शेयर करना चाहेंगे इस प्रेजेंटेशन में. छोटे से ट्राइबल एरिया की बात करें तो गुजरात में लैंडलेसनेस की जो बात है वो ज़्यादातर ये नहीं है कि लोगों के पास ज़मीन नहीं है. ज़मीन तो है लेकिन वो सरकारी ज़मीन है, या तो फॉरेस्ट की है या रेवेन्यू डिपार्टमेंट की है, और इसके ऊपर उनको टाइटल नहीं मिला है. और इसकी वजह से जो है वो लैंडलेसनेस है. ज़मीन अधिकतर सब लोगों के पास है, वो कल्टीवेट भी करते हैं, लेकिन उसका टाइटल नहीं है, इसलिए इलीगल है. और इसलिए जो है वो एंक्रोचर माने जाते हैं, और इसी के कारण उनके ऊपर एट्रोसिटीज भी होती है, क्योंकि फॉरेस्ट डिपार्टमेंट उनको उस जमीन से निकालेगा, रेवेन्यू डिपार्टमेंट उनको उस जमीन से निकालेगा। तो ये सारी जो है इश्यूज रहे हैं। उसका सीधा सॉल्यूशन फॉरेस्ट राइट एक्ट का जो एक अहम जो एम था और पर्पस था वो ये था कि हम जो जमीन ट्राइबल्स कल्टीवेट कर रहे हैं उसके ऊपर उनको पट्टे दिए जाए, ताकि जो है ये एविक्शन के थ्रेट से जो है बचे। तो ये मेन है। ऐसा ही कानून रेवेन्यू लैंड के लिए भी होना चाहिए कि सरकारी जमीन जो ट्राइबल्स जोत रहे हैं उसके ऊपर भी उनको मिले, लेकिन ये भी ज़्यादा नहीं हुआ है। लेकिन से जैसे हम जानते हैं कानून तो बन गया, अमल बहुत मुश्किल है, और उसी का थोड़ा अनुभव जो गुजरात का जो आया है वो आपके साथ शेयर करना चाहूँगा। गुजरात में ऐसे एक कानून बना, शुरुआत में एकदम अच्छा चला कि बहुत अच्छी तरह से उसका अमल आएगा, ग्राम सभाएं बन गई, FRCs बन गई, सब एवरीथिंग वेंट अहेड। ग्राम सभाओं ने काम भी बहुत अच्छा किया, लेकिन उसके तुरंत बाद जो है पहले 10% और बाद में थोड़ा बढ़ाकर 20% क्लेम्स जो है मंजूर हुए, बाकी के सब खारिज हो गए। सो 1,82,000 फैमिलीज ने जो है क्लेम किया था, जो हमारे शेड्यूल एरिया के डिस्ट्रिक्ट्स थे, उसमें से सिर्फ 30,000 मंजूर हुए, बाकी सब खारिज हो गए। जो मंजूर हुए उसमें भी मांगा है 5 एकड़, 8 एकड़, आपको मिला है 1 एकड़, तो एरिया भी जो है बहुत कम मिला। तो ये जो है आम स्थिति थी। तो हम लोगों ने 2011 में फिर हाई कोर्ट में पिटीशन की, और उसी के उसको ध्यान में रख के गुजरात गवर्नमेंट ने भी ये कहा कि जी जो भी रिजेक्शन हो गया है, 1 लाख करीब केस जो है रिजेक्ट हो गए थे, उन सबको हम पुनः समीक्षा करेंगे, सबको फिर से जांचेंगे। हाई कोर्ट ने भी बहुत लंबा ऑर्डर दिया कि कैसे जांच करोगे, कौन से एविडेंस ध्यान में रखोगे। ये सारा करने के बाद 2013 में हाई कोर्ट ने ऑर्डर दिया कि ये सारा करना है। तो हम लोग सोच रहे थे कि शायद अभी कुछ होगा। अभी ये हाई कोर्ट के ऑर्डर का भी लगभग 5 साल हो गया है। सो 2018 में हम आते हैं, तो पहले 30% था, पहले जो 20% था वो बढ़ के अभी 46% जो है अप्रूवल हुआ है। तो पहले 30,000 था, वो अभी हो गया है 80-82,000, लेकिन फिर भी अभी 1 लाख क्लेम्स जो है बाकी है। और एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन यही मान के चलता है कि ये जो बाकी है सब एविडेंस नहीं है, तो खारिज होने के लायक है। तो यही लेकिन सबको अभी रिजेक्ट नहीं किया है, पेंडिंग छोड़ा है, कुछ को रिजेक्ट भी किया है। और कुछ जिलों में ये जो हमने जो येलो से जो हाईलाइट किए हैं, दाहोद है, साबरकांठा है, छोटा उदेपुर है, रिव्यू करना है, कुछ नहीं किया है। पहले की जो स्थिति थी वही आज की स्थिति है। हाईकोर्ट के फैसले के पहले जो स्थिति थी वही करीबन स्थिति आज है, और उसमें कुछ नहीं और सब रिजेक्ट कर दिया है क्लेम्स। उसमें एक और थोड़ा, और ये बोलते यही है कि एविडेंस नहीं है, एविडेंस नहीं है इसलिए ये सारे रिजेक्ट हो जाएंगे, और कोई चारा नहीं है। लगभग पूरे देश में ये स्थिति है। तो यहाँ हम लोगों ने नर्मदा जिले में खुद लोगों ने ये जीपीएस सर्वे करना, उसको 2005 की सैटेलाइट इमेज पे बिठाना, उसके नक्शे तैयार करना। तो ये सारे नक्शे लोगों ने तैयार किए थे जीपीएस करके। ये सारे ऐसे ये सारे नक्शे जो है प्रेजेंट किए थे एविडेंस के रूप में कि हमारा खेत जो है 2005 से हम कल्टीवेट कर रहे हैं। सर्वे किया, उसका नक्शा बनाया, 2005 की इमेजरी पे रखा। ये सारे एविडेंस होने के बावजूद भी जो है डिस्ट्रिक्ट एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन इन चीज़ों को ध्यान में नहीं ले रही थी कि ये तो ग्राम सभा ने किया है, उसका कोई मतलब नहीं है, ऐसे मान के उसको नहीं ले रही थी। बाद में हमारी ट्राइबल सेक्रेटरी के साथ काफ़ी बातें हुई, यहाँ ट्राइबल मिनिस्ट्री में भी बातें हुई। उसके बाद जो है गुजरात गवर्नमेंट ने ये डिसीजन लिया कि मान लीजिए कि ग्राम सभा ने किया है, ठीक ठाक किया है ऐसा लग रहा है, लेकिन फिर भी जो है हम इंडिपेंडेंट जांच कराए इन चीज़ों की। तो आप इसके लिए तैयार हैं? तो हम कहे कि हम तैयार हैं। तो उन्होंने बोला गिर फाउंडेशन, जो कि फॉरेस्ट डिपार्टमेंट की रिसर्च एजेंसी है, उसको पूरा जो है तो ये ग्राम सभा ने जो काम किया है वो ये एक बार वेरीफाई करेगी, ये रिपोर्ट दे देगी, तो उसके हिसाब से फिर कमेटी जो है पूरा काम करेगी। तो गिर का रिपोर्ट भी लगभग हमने 10,000 8,000 के आसपास क्लेम्स के सब डेटा गिर फाउंडेशन को भेजे, जुलाई 2017 से गिर फाउंडेशन के रिपोर्ट आ गए, पार्शियली अप्रूव क्लेम्स और पेंडिंग क्लेम्स दोनों की। सॉरी, ठीक है। तो दोनों के ऊपर जो है तो उनके फाइंडिंग्स आ गए और हमको ताज्जुब भी, आप मानेंगे नहीं, हमको विश्वास भी नहीं था कि गिर फाउंडेशन इतना अच्छा काम करेगा। इसने हर एक प्लॉट का पूरा वेरिफिकेशन किया, बताया कि 99% केसेस में ग्राम सभा ने जो डिसीजन लिए हैं वो सही है, ऐसा बताया। उतना भी नहीं, उतना बताया कि एरिया पार्शियली अप्रूव क्लेम्स कि 2000 क्लेम थे, उसमें डिस्ट्रिक्ट कमेटी ने जो है 2000 हेक्टेयर मंजूर की थी। ग्राम सभा ने कहा था कि उनको 5000 हेक्टेयर मिलना चाहिए, गिर फाउंडेशन ने कहा 5000 हेक्टेयर मिलना चाहिए। इतना कम, 2000 से सीधा एरिया जो है 2 गुना बढ़ गया। ये भी गिर फाउंडेशन ने कहा। पेंडिंग क्लेम्स भी 96% अप्रूवल रेट जो है इन ये 5000 क्लेम्स में आ रहा है। तो ये एक अनुभव हुआ। तो हम सोच रहे थे कि नर्मदा में ये अनुभव हुआ है, बाकी जिले में भी ये करेंगे तो एक जो है पूरा अच्छे तरीके से FRA का अमल गुजरात में हो, उसका वातावरण हम बना पाएंगे। लेकिन ये जुलाई 2017 में ये रिपोर्ट आ गए, डिस्ट्रिक्ट कलेक्टर और डिस्ट्रिक्ट वो DFO दोनों ने नो रिटर्न ऑर्डर्स वर्बल ये तय कर दिया कि हमको ये गिर फाउंडेशन नहीं मानना है। तो इसका भी अमल नहीं हो रहा है और दे हैव डिसाइडेड नॉट टू टेक इनटू कॉग्निजेंस ये रिपोर्ट एंड दे हैव डिसाइडेड नॉट टू होल्ड एनी DLC मीटिंग्स। सब वैसा का वैसा जो है पेंडिंग रखा है। हम लोगों ने अभी ही हाई कोर्ट में एक PI फिर से फाइल की है कि इसका जो है अमल ठीक से हो। बस इतना ही कह के ठीक है।
Extremely interesting. Now I request Madam Shamona Khanna, who is an advocate in the Supreme Court and extremely passionate about tribal issues, to say her thoughts. Shamona ji.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'd especially like to acknowledge Dr. Nand Kumar Sai, Chairperson of the NCST, and all the honorable members who are here today, and Mr. Raghav Chandra, Secretary, NCST, respected friends and members of the floor. I thank you, first of all, for inviting me to be here and also giving me an opportunity to share my thoughts. I noticed that I'm the only lawyer in the morning session. So please forgive me for taking a slightly legalistic approach to the issue, and I'll try to explain why I feel it's important to look at the philosophy of the law. One of the things that we've been speaking this morning about the entire constitutional framework and also a lot of the positive legislations that are there with regard to Adivasis and scheduled tribes in this country. And what I notice is that we immediately go to a discussion of the 5th and the 6th schedule, and then immediately start talking about the statutory legislations passed by Parliament and also the state legislatures, such as PESA, FRA, LARR, the various land alienation legislations. I want to actually draw your attention to the provisions of the Fundamental Rights chapter, which is chapter 3 of the Constitution, and it's actually the core value system inside our Constitution is articulated in the Fundamental Rights chapter. And bring to your attention the provisions relating to the right to equality, which is what we would call, in Hindi we would call Samanta Ka Adhikar. Articles 14, 15, 16 and 17 are called the Equality Charter of the Constitution. And it's very important to recognize that our Constitution has adopted an approach to the right to equality, which is a little bit different from other constitutions, at least at that time in the world. Today, the South African Constitution has taken its inspiration from our Constitution to adopt a different approach to equality in their constitution. So there is one way of looking at the right to equality, which is a formal equality approach, which is that everybody should be treated equally. And if you read only Article 14 of the Constitution, that is what you might end up believing that the right to equality means in our Constitution. But I argue that we must read 15, 16, and 17 together with Article 14. And when we do that, we realize that there is a different approach to equality which recognizes that there are marginalized communities in our nation who are socially and economically backward. They have been historically discriminated against. They are historically disadvantaged. And there is a need to pay special attention to those communities and give them a sort of a special attention, especially in the law and in the policies of the government. And that approach is known as a substantive equality approach. And that is the approach that is there in our Constitution. Now, this is not something that I am saying for the first time on this podium. This is something that has been recognized by the Supreme Court of India in many, many judgments, in many, many articulations of what the right to equality means. And very interestingly, many of these judgments that have come from the Supreme Court articulating the substantive equality approach have come through judgments where land alienation legislations have been challenged. And numerous times the courts have held that because these land alienation legislations which I'm talking about are basically the laws preventing tribals from selling their lands to non-tribals at the state level. These were challenged in the courts on the ground that these violated the right to equality and the freedom of business and so on and so forth. And the courts have rejected those challenges on the ground that these legislations have been brought into force because tribal communities, Adivasi communities, have been historically discriminated against, and the government has a responsibility under Article 15 of the Constitution to ensure that this historical injustice is undone. So many times we hear about the historical injustice in decisions of the Supreme Court. One of the most amazing decisions of the Supreme Court where this has been articulated very, very beautifully is the Samta judgment. And it is now the law of the land, something that we continuously tend to forget, that Supreme Court judgments are law of the land. And that articulation then happened in the Forest Rights Act, when the preamble says that the act is there to undo historical injustice. So the point that I'm making is, and I'm trying to make it briefly, is that when we talk about special legislation, special constitutional provisions for protection of scheduled tribes, for protection of scheduled areas, these laws are not an exception to the rule, but they are part of our constitutional morality. They're part of the Constitution's approach to what is our country about. And I think that's very important to understand, and it's a very, very integral part of my work. And I know that in the 4 years that I'll tell you now why it's important, this articulation. It sounds philosophical, but when you're on the ground and you have received, as a lawyer, many times I have received queries relating to how do we interpret a particular legislation, how do we interpret a particular provision of the law. And at that point of time, the answer that you give is going to depend on whether you're going to approach it from a philosophical jurisprudential approach that is grounded in substantive equality, or you're going to take a technical approach. Because let's face the facts that what we decide is the correct interpretation of a particular provision of law is going to depend upon our philosophical approach. And this is something that we faced again and again when I was, the 4 years that I spent as legal consultant with the Ministry of Tribal Affairs, we were challenged many, many times with these kind of contradictions. Some of these did make it to the public domain, but many of these conversations actually happened behind closed doors and did not make it to the public domain. And time and again, the importance of the constitutional approach to equality, that we're talking about forest dwellers, we're talking about Adivasis, we're talking about communities who have been historically disadvantaged, and therefore our interpretation of the law of a specific legal provision has to be in that context. So it is in that context that when one of the challenges that came to the ministry was whether Forest Rights Act applies to municipal areas or not. And it was very interesting because if you read the Forest Rights Act, from the first word to the last word, there is not a single mention of urban areas. But if you look at the Forest Rights Act as something that has a purpose and have a purposive interpretation of the Forest Rights Act, then if there are forest areas inside municipal boundaries, then obviously the Forest Rights Act has to apply to those forest areas. So the ministry very fortuitously and I must say admirably moved forward with issuing a clarification. And I have to also share with you that today that very clarification that was issued with a long guideline on how exactly the Forest Rights Act should be implemented in municipal areas is now being undermined. Another area that is very, very important when actually there are so many issues and I think many of you have highlighted those issues. So I'll only talk about two issues, which is municipalities and mining. And I'll just briefly indicate to you why we need to look at both these issues from a substantive equality approach. So as you very well know that there is no law which mirrors PESA applicable to municipal areas and scheduled areas. This law was presented, a draft bill was presented to Parliament, I think in 2001. It never saw the light of day. Many litigations have come to many of the high courts, some of them have come to the Supreme Court, and have found no space at all. When I look at the decisions and I look at the argumentations that have been made, it's very clear to me that when the lawyers and the litigants are approaching the court, they're starting with the letter of the law. And it's very difficult to convince the court that you need to have a law similar to PESA inside a municipal area. Because the court is not going to understand why do you need a law which is basically about Gram Sabhas inside an urban area. It's not going to make sense to them. So that is precisely the reason we need to go back to the history of it. And today there are cases pending in different high courts, even continuing to be pending. Meanwhile, in large parts of the scheduled areas, municipal areas are being declared wherever there is any anticipation that there will be these Gram Sabhas that are going to create some trouble relating to a particular project. That area will be declared into a municipality. And that's the end of the Gram Sabhas, that's the end of PESA. And those Gram Sabhas no longer have any power. So this is an area I feel that in fact an organization like the National Commission for Scheduled Tribes, which has a constitutional status, it is an issue that must be taken up, and it's really something that should be high up on our agenda because it's one of the ways that is being used to completely pervert the entire constitutional design. The other thing that is very, very important, and we should talk about it in much more detail, perhaps at length at another meeting, but which I want to flag today, is the issue of mining. Now, you have brought to the fore how a large amount of mining is happening in tribal areas. Large quantities of royalties are flowing out of tribal areas as a result of that mining. And there doesn't seem to be any quid pro quo. There's nothing coming back. But even prior to the issue of mining is the issue of acquisition of those lands for mining purposes. Now, those of us who have studied the Land Acquisition Law of 2013, we are completely dismayed by the fact that the Coal-Bearing Areas Acquisition Act, for instance, has been left out specifically. It is not covered by the Land Acquisition Act. And we also know that large areas are being acquired across tribal areas for coal mines. Again, this is something that has been challenged in the high courts. And one of the high courts has, and I will not name that high court to not give that high court any credit. One of the high courts has actually held that the Coal Bearing Areas Act does not require the conformity with PESA because PESA is not mentioned in the statute. Now, it is the Bilaspur High Court. No, seriously, it's like, you know, when I started off by saying that there is a need to recognize that there is a constitutional morality that recognizes historical discrimination, and then you have a high court that is interpreting a law in a manner which is so hyper-technical that it beggars belief. Because PESA doesn't require to mention every single legislation to which it applies. It is a constitutional legislation, and every single legislation which needs to adhere to PESA does not need to mention the word PESA in it. So it's just a completely bad decision. It's under review right now, thankfully, and hopefully we will win the review and have a favorable decision at that time. But meanwhile, acquisitions under the coal bearing areas are taking place across the country without applying LARR, without applying PESA. And I think it's really time that we recognize the fact that these are horrible illegalities that are taking place. Today we have a lot of attention, and I know that there's a whole afternoon session dedicated to the Atrocities Act, so I won't speak too much on that. But let's recognize that these violations that are taking place, whether they are of the Forest Rights Act, whether they are of the constitutional provisions, whether they are of PESA, whether they are of the land alienation legislations, these are not just violations in civil law. This is not some landlord telling the tenant to get out before the lease is expired. These are not civil disputes, they are criminal offenses. And let's recognize the fact that there is a huge amount of crime that is taking place across the country against Adivasi communities. And it's time that we took a serious note of that and recognize it for what it is. In conclusion, I just want to say share with you a small piece of advice, legal advice. When the Niyamgiri judgment was pronounced by the Supreme Court in 2013, it was, of course, a moment of great celebration, and it was something that everybody who has done work on the Forest Rights Act has read that judgment and has celebrated that judgment. But what we decided, and I think it was not something that the community decided or the tribal rights movement decided, but we did not allow that judgment to be restricted to those 12 Gram Sabhas of Dongaria Konds who actually then had the Gram Sabha meetings. We did not say that this whole exercise of the Supreme Court interpreting the law, whether the forest approval is valid or not, relates to those 12 Gram Sabha meetings. We took that judgment, and every piece of jurisprudential argument that was made in that judgment, we took it and applied it to every single situation that arose subsequently. So what I find very interesting is that the Archvahini judgment, which was pronounced a few months later, right, which relates to non-implementation of the FRA and the rejection of 80% of claims, has relied upon the Niyamgiri judgment, which relates to the Forest Conservation Act. Now, if you look at it as a technical sort of a person, then you will say, how is the judgment relating to the Forest Conservation Act related to rejection of 80% of claims? The reason why it's applicable is because inside that judgment, the Niyamgiri, there's a philosophy, and that philosophy has been applied. And the jurisprudential arguments have been taken from this case and applied here. Similarly, I can give you examples of cases where the challenge was to an environmental clearance, and the court has relied upon the Niyamgiri judgment which relates to a forest clearance. These are two actually separate areas of law, because there's a recognition that the Forest Rights Act is about historical injustice, and this philosophy has been applied from this case into this case. What I find very unfortunate, and I would urge all of you to think about, is that we have great judgments, many more than the Niyamgiri case. We have great judgments from the Supreme Court and many of the high courts relating to forest, relating to scheduled areas, relating to scheduled tribes. There is the Samta judgment, there is the Rakesh Kumar judgment relating to elections, there are the Lingappa Pochana judgments relating to Andhra Pradesh and so on, where the articulation of the right to equality, the substantive equality and real justice has been articulated. We have not taken this huge, rich jurisprudence and applied it to our work. And I think that it's time we did it, because otherwise we are going to see really an upsurge of the kind of things that we're seeing in certain parts of the country where these Pathalkari movements have started, where people are saying that we want to reject the Constitution. The Constitution today is an enormous wealth of power for us, and it's about time we took that power and understood it for what it is.